Yeah, well, I guess I'll introduce myself really quickly. I know that I was just introduced a little bit, but I'm Hannah Floyd. I'm a senior at Centaurus High School, which is in Lafayette. Tonight I'm going to be talking about my experiences at Hog Island last summer. I was one of the recipients of the Boulder County Audubon Society scholarship, and I got to go out to Maine for about like a week and a half-ish, and go out to Hog Island with a bunch of other teen ornithologists and naturalists from around the country. And I got to see some really cool birds. I got to eat some good food and meet some cool people, and also do a lot of other ecology and nature study that you will get to see tonight in this brief presentation that I have prepared for y'all. So I think I'm ready to get started. All right, and I assume I just press the arrows to move forward. Okay, perfect. Well, this presentation tonight is kind of just going to go over some of my favorite memories and photos that I took while I was at Hog Island. We're going to start off the night with a black guillemot, which out in Maine, you'll see those basically from shore, standing on the beaches or on the rocks. You'll always see these swimming out in the ocean. And then as a camp participant, I actually got to go to an island a couple miles out to sea off of where Hog Island was, called Eastern Egg Rock. And on that island, there were a bunch of different nesting seabirds, black guillemots included. So I actually did get to see a black guillemot nest. They nest under the rocks, and we got to see their eggs, which surprisingly enough for me, they were like bright blue with like black speckles on them, which I thought was really cool. And they actually like nest underneath the rocks. And this particular one was posing up on the rocks for us and made for a nice photo. And unfortunately in this photo you can't tell, but black guillemots have bright red like throats. So when they open their mouths and they whistle and squeak and stuff, you can catch a glimpse of the bright red inside of their throat. So that was one of the really like picture perfect birds that we got to see both on Hog Island and then get really close experience with at Eastern Egg Rock down there. Possibly, maybe. You can click it also if you want, that's fine. Okay. So another bird, of course, out in Maine, this is probably one of the most sought after and one of the most iconic birds of Maine, is the Atlantic puffin that we got to see out there. This is one of the birds that I was obviously most excited for. I'm sure most people will never pass up the opportunities to see an Atlantic puffin. And like the black guillemots, these were also nesting on Eastern Egg Rock. Eastern Egg Rock was kind of originally designated as a nesting seabird island to kind of try to bring back the Atlantic puffin population in this part of Maine, and it's been very successful. We were there a little bit too early to actually see any of the puffin chicks, but we did get to see some of the adults, like in that middle image, bringing fish, like mouthfuls of fish and seaweed back to their nest, presumably to their mate or for themselves. And puffins nest in burrows, so we didn't actually see any of the nests themselves or the eggs, because they actually can like burrow underground into their nests. And we got to go into blinds on Eastern Egg Rock and have really up close studies with these birds, and see them coming back with beakfuls full of fish, and then see them interacting with each other. And it was super cool to get to experience these birds, see them flying around and just posing perfect for photographs and whatnot. So you can go to the next slide. I don't know if this is going to work. So, all right. Another iconic bird of Eastern Egg Rock, and one of my favorites, was the Arctic terns. You can tell that this is an Arctic tern by the kind of crimson bright red bill and also their feet. And one of the cool things about Eastern Egg Rock was that while we were out there, we got to kind of be with the researchers that were living out there, there's like 3 or 4 researchers each summer that go out there and help band the birds and count and do all these surveys of all the different kind of seabirds that live out on Eastern Egg Rock, Arctic terns included. And so there was 3 terns that were on the island, the Arctic terns and the roseate terns and the common terns, and we'll see a couple pictures of those a little bit later on. But Arctic terns were one of my favorite. They were the birds that you encountered when you first landed on Eastern Egg Rock. And getting up to the research station was kind of like a maze almost, because Arctic terns will literally lay their eggs and their eggs will hatch on the granite, on the ground there. And their eggs, and another slide, you'll be able to see this, but the eggs of the terns nest or blend perfectly well with the ground. So you had to constantly be looking at your feet to make sure that you weren't going to step on any eggs. But then at the same time, the terns, they were obviously freaking out about all these humans walking around on the island right up next to their eggs. So they would be dive bombing our heads. And we actually had to wear cardboard inside of our hats because they would peck your head so hard that sometimes it could actually make you bleed. And my head never started bleeding, but I did get pecked a few times. I also got pooped on a lot. I had to wear my raincoat into the shower that night because it was green when I landed on the island and it was white when I left the island. So they definitely a little crazy to dive bombing at you and you're watching the ground, but it's such a cool experience. They're calling like crazy and unlike anything that I had ever experienced. So that was really cool. Next slide. All right. So here is another one of the tern species, also on Eastern Egg Rock. This is a common tern, and this was out of the 3 tern species, one of, I think, probably my favorite, just because they were a lot more active than the other terns that we observed. The roseate terns were a lot more, they were a little bit further back in the island, and we didn't really have a lot of experience with them. And the Arctic terns were really only in the beginning, but the common terns were a lot more like ubiquitous across the island. And so you can kind of see there what I was talking about with the chicks and the eggs. That isn't an Arctic tern, but they look pretty similar when they're at that stage. So the egg, if you can imagine that being dive bombed to the head and hearing all the crazy like cacophony of the terns, and then also having to pay attention to what is at your feet. It's a lot going on at once, but it's super duper cool. And the terns there just pose for you on posts. That one in the bottom corner was actually like on this like birdhouse thing, and it was just kind of like squawking at us like, what are you doing close to my nest and stuff like that. So it was super cool to be able to get up close and also just to observe what the researchers on that island were doing and to like kind of see what maybe a future career in ornithology could look like and how many different options there are out in the field for that. Okay, and then this is another really special bird that nests on Eastern Egg Rock. This is a Leach's storm petrel, which when we think of storm petrels, I think we tend to think of the wide open ocean. They're kind of gliding across the waves, and we don't really think of them being able to be held in a hand. I don't know if you can tell in that image, but there's actually dirt all over the bill of it because they nest in burrows. And so that was a researcher that was handling it. So she knew what she was doing. And basically she would lie on her stomach on the ground, and then she would like plunge her hand underneath the ground, and then she would like pull it out, and then she had a Leach's storm petrel just in her hand. And we got to see it, which is super cool because they're nocturnal, so it's kind of hard to see them throughout the day. And fun fact, this is right now, as of now, the only bird species that I have on my dad that he has never seen. So this is the only one that I have. I don't know how much longer that will last, but I'm relishing it while it lasts. So that was super cool to see, and to also like just see them in their like nesting. And I never really thought of them as being birds that would come onto like islands and then nest under the ground like that. So lots of cool things that I learned from Eastern Egg Rock. All right, so there is more to the Hog Island experience than Eastern Egg Rock. When you're out there as a camper, you get to go to Eastern Egg Rock for a day. And that's a really cool experience because none of the other camps there actually get to land on Eastern Egg Rock. They all just kind of circle around the island by boat. But the campers at Hog Island actually get to go onto the island and get up close to the birds and meet the researchers there. But while I was in Maine, I took advantage of both being with Hog Island, and then I also spent a few days there before with my dad, and we got to do some exploring of our own. So these were some of the other cool birds that I got to see while I was out in Maine that I wanted to share. In the top corner, we have a salt marsh sparrow, which is it's kind of a special bird for the East Coast and especially that area. And salt marsh sparrows are becoming increasingly impacted by like rising sea levels as the king tides and the oceans are rising and getting a lot worse. Their habitat is being encroached upon by the ocean coming in and then urbanization on the other side. And unfortunately, there's not really much evidence that they're like adapting and moving outwards, like the Nelson sparrow and other birds in that kind of habitat. And on this particular day that we were there had actually been a king tide the night before. And so it was really unusual to see them singing out like this in June. So unfortunately, we hypothesized that a lot of their nests had been wiped out from the night before. And so they were out singing, presumably like starting over, singing for their mate and stuff like that. But it was really cool to see those sparrows in action. And then in that middle image, are common eiders. It's a fun little term that I learned out when I was in Maine. It's called a creche of common eiders. And basically it's a bunch of different adult female eiders. They're the bigger birds in that picture, and they kind of all band together as one and take care of a bunch of different, like a bunch of young all at the same time. So this creche, I think that's not the whole one. There was probably about like 30 birds in there, maybe like 5 or 6 adults and then like 20-ish chicks, which was 20. That was really fun to see them kind of riding on the waves, a little bit of girl power also with all the moms coming together to take care. And then also on the beach, we got to see piping plovers, which was something that I was really excited about. These are another bird that are facing a lot of threats. This one a lot also from humans. So along the beach, they had what they're called exclosures, which like an enclosure, they're built to keep people out of it. So it's like a little cage on the beach where the birds can leave like to and from their little nest, but no humans or dogs could get in. So their eggs were safely protected on the beach. And this one was out and about, kind of like running along the waves, catching little whatever they eat and stuff like that. So that was really fun to see that as well. Next slide. All right. And then what was really awesome about Hog Island is I'm not just a birder, I'm also a naturalist, and I love learning about things other than birds. And at my experience at Hog Island, something that the instructors there really stressed was how much other nature stuff there was there for us to observe. And there were so many new plants and fungi and insects that were new to me, and I wanted to share some of my favorites with you tonight. So here's my little obligatory plants slide. This was all from the day that when we were on Hog Island, we got to go to the mainland Maine for one day, and we got to go to a bog, which I had never really had an experience going to. So in the top corner, that pink flower is called tuberous grass pink. It's a really special plant of the North American like bog ecosystem. And then in the bottom corner is round leaf sundew, which is actually a carnivorous plant also in like bog ecosystems. And it's kind of hard to tell, but there's these little like spikes on the plant and they're coated in sugar, and that's how they attract insects and then eat the insects. And then in the background, there's also a purple pitcher plant, which was another plant that was proliferating on the bog. And then in the middle is a plant that was kind of all over the forest. It's called world loosestrife. And it was a really pretty plant. It's because the image I the way I cropped it, you can't really tell, but it was like probably a stalk about like 2 feet tall. And then every couple inches there was that kind of growth with the leaves outwards and the flowers. And then you'd go another 2 inches and it'd be the same thing. So it was like kind of a cool, like tiered plant almost. So it was super fun to have instructors that were just as excited about flowers and insects as I was, and were willing to stop and explain all this to me because everything was new to me because I had never been out there before. Okay, and then you may find this surprising, hearing me from being from Colorado. I've lived in Colorado all my life, but I love the ocean. I want to study marine science one day. So of course, one of the main attractions and one of the main reasons that I wanted to go to Maine to this camp was because I knew I'd be surrounded by the ocean and that I would get to experience both seabirds, but also all of the different tide pooling organisms and invertebrates that were out there. So these were some of the coolest things that I got to see when I was in Maine. In the top is a rock pool prawn, which is a kind of shrimp. And they were everywhere. You could just like scoop your hand up and then you would pick one up, which is what that image is of my hand doing just that. And then the middle image, believe it or not, that is like besides the puffins and the terns, that is actually one of the organisms that I wanted to see the most when I went to Maine. Before I went there, I made a list of everything I wanted to see, and I put seashore springtail, which is what that is, pretty near the top of my list. And this is a hexapod-like insect, and you can't really tell from this image, but these little organisms are actually like really small. And so that's like a macro image with my camera. And then they're in like conglomerations of like a couple hundred all at once. And they just kind of float along the top at low tide and you see them. And I was really excited to see these little tiny gray hexapods. And then sea stars, which was super exciting to see. I'd never seen sea stars before, and we were flipping over rocks, and at one point we hear this person behind us like freaking out and going crazy, and we're like, look around, and there's this rock with like literally 30 sea stars just piled on top of each other. So that's only like half of the rock. And then you can also see there's a green sea urchin, so there's also sea urchins underneath this rock. So the tide pooling biodiversity and just the creatures that I got to see with the marine focus there was unmatched, and that was one of my favorite memories for sure from there. Okay, and then of course, besides all of the amazing birds and nature and prawns and everything that I got to see, there was the amazing humans that I got to spend my time with there. I didn't take this image. This was an image from one of the photographers at Hog Island, but this is when we were on Eastern Egg Rock. That little shack looking thing is actually where the researchers stay for the entire summer. And so that's all the campers. And then there's a couple people in there that you might recognize. On the far left corner in here, I don't know what it looks like on Zoom, but there's a guy in the far left corner, and that's Christian Hagenlocker. He was in Colorado for a little bit. Some of you may know him. And then Eva Lark Matthews is next to him. And then the other camp counselor was Tori, and she's in the middle, kind of. She almost looks like a camper. And she's actually standing right next to Claire Van Tol, who some of you may know. She was the other camper that got a scholarship from Boulder County Audubon Society, and we were actually in the same camp together, and I had never met her, so it was super fun to have someone else, a fellow person from Boulder, to be there with me. We roomed together for the week, and since then we've stayed in touch, and we've planned a couple things to go out birding out here in Colorado because we had never met before. But it was super fun to be out with all of these different naturalists and then also interact with the researchers that were on the island and hear what they had to say and teach us. And yeah, so that's Eastern Egg Rock. And then I think I have like 1 or 2 more slides. So this was from the tide pooling day. We got a lot of time out in the field, a lot of research. So this was like that day when with all the prawns and the seashore springtail and stuff like that. We got to spend an entire afternoon at low tide kind of digging through seaweed and flipping over rocks. And at one point we found like a little conglomeration of eels in one of the pools. It was really cool. And at Hog Island, they really stressed like hands-on things. We got a lot of time to be out in the field and just be present in nature and observing it, like this afternoon with the tide pooling with some of my friends, and that's me in the bottom corner, if you couldn't tell. So yeah, that basically wraps up my portion of this presentation. That is me lying on the forest floor taking a picture of pine sap, which is a type of plant. Actually, it's called a monoheterotroph. So unlike plants that photosynthesize, it actually parasitizes upon fungi. So that was a nice little find on Hog Island, and my friend took that picture of me lying in the dirt taking a picture of it. And there were so many other experiences like that on Hog Island, and what I shared tonight is just a tiny handful of the many amazing things that I got to experience while I was out there. So I want to thank, first of all, Boulder County Audubon Society, Carol, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to go out to Maine and explore. And if there are any like young birders or anyone that is interested in this or is thinking about it, I would 100% say that you should do this. It was truly like life-changing and so much fun. And I got to meet so many different researchers and ornithologists and people that I just didn't know that there was this kind of like work out there. And then just make some really good memories and learn a lot of cool stuff out there. So that concludes my part of the presentation. If there's any questions, I bet we'll do that at the end. If you have anything that you want to add or ask me or anything like that. But for now, that is the conclusion for my part, and off to my dad.